Hey everybody! So I hope you are doing well, staying safe, being productive, or being incredibly lazy. I think that this is the perfect time to do whatever you need. I'd like to thank the Vernon Filley for giving me the space to talk about my artwork. It's great to see what people are curious about. And on that note, I'm just going to start going through the list of questions. I've grouped the ones that are similar. How did you start with all of this? I've always been a person that likes to give gifts. If I had, a special feeling or emotion for someone, it was somebody's like special day, I would make them something. Also, I was probably the only teenager in Kansas that attempted to make their own surfboard, which failed miserably. It broke, it sunk. But that ultimately led me into illustration in my undergrad degree, which was great because it taught me how to speak with a visual language of combining symbols for things in order to like for example, if somebody wants to buy a product, the illustration will allow them to see what their life could be with this product. That led me into animation from a master's degree, which is understanding how you can show a character dealing with their emotions through a story, and you develop their character arc. I saw that very similar to the installation art that I do now. So installation is very similar to watching a movie in a theater, although a person walks into an exhibition space and engages with that atmosphere, taking their time, being able to maneuver around and experience the emotion that the artist has designed for them to feel. I think sculptures, especially the ones that I do that are mixed with found object and are trying to give the impression of reality and maybe with a bit of a metaphor mixed in there, it actually physically changes the way somebody interacts with a space. Their body language shifts as they walk around a sculpture to examine it. What inspires me? Honestly, I am very inspired by a bit of irony that I find in classical sculptures. This art period is all about human divinity. It's all about perfection, beauty, and harmony. Although we study these sculptures from this period in an imperfect state. And I think it provides a really strong metaphor that humans are imperfect, but we are always improving. When I have an idea for something new to create, do I sketch it or do I create it as I work? A little bit of both. I think that the main idea for a work of art is to take what's in your mind and put it into reality. Part of my process to do that is to sketch it out in a lot of different perspectives in order to see what it'll be like in the round. Although, just because I've sketched it doesn't mean that it's permanent. I am always adapting to what is happening with the medium, and the messages or the meanings that I am trying to say with the artwork changes based on that medium. So that answers another question. When I'm working, like let's say I'm carving a wood sculpture or something, and a split appears in the wood that I wouldn't have been able to see when it was on its surface, I like to incorporate that split into the meaning of the sculpture, and so it'll change my entire idea of what it could mean. Because if I don't do that, then it just becomes a split in the wood, whereas I feel like the medium can actually create metaphors for us. Another example is, let's say that you're working on a sculpture and it's a large sculpture and there's a lot of weight that you have put onto like a metal skeleton, okay? But the gravity of that sculpture starts to weigh down what the sculpture looks like. I think that that's a great opportunity for an artist to use what's naturally happening with gravity to make a statement or make an opinion about human suffering or the interaction of what humans are experiencing in different areas of their life. What made you think about doing these artworks? So along with the classical irony that I find, I also have a lot of interest in anachronistic objects for a similar reason. Anachronistic, outdated, these objects that have obviously been improved, machines, tools, clothing, you name it, anything that can represent what it means to be human. But these anachronistic tools, like classical art, also show that humans are imperfect, but that we are constantly improving or developing our ideas. I'm curious if you see your sculpture as self-portraiture. Yeah, totally. I definitely do. I think all artwork is a reflection of ourselves. I think that being an artist, we're trying to adapt to what's happening in society. That comes to our own personal perspective of what that is. And therefore, when we create, it is just cultivating that idea. And I think that the more accurate that is, the more universal it becomes. I know that's a famous quote, like the more individualized, the more universal. And I also view it similar to like an actor, is the role an actor takes on their personality. To a certain degree it is, because they're able to envision what that role is through their mind and their outlook on how they've experienced their life. And the more accurate that is, the more a viewer or an audience can engage with that role because of that authenticity that the actor is providing them. Am I motivated by my experience of social distancing in the pandemic? I will say that despite everything happening, me personally, my life has not shifted too much because I think that artists are more likely to self-isolate because of how their process works and how much we're working with a medium and by ourselves anyway. That said, I've been able to witness how it's affecting other people, which has been very interesting to me. For example, I started working on this sculpture. You probably won't be able to see it too well because of the light in here, but I started working on this sculpture and it was a big portrait, like the wood would come out to here almost. But I decided to put it through a planer, and so it gives a very box-like or perhaps claustrophobic feel. And I really convinced that I came up with that because of this box-like mentality that we're all in our own houses. We're in cubes, kind of. And so there's a little bit of an interpretation from that. What is the longest amount of time that I've spent on a project? So one thing I'd like to say is I do not think that an artist should equate quality with time. Just because you work, there's a lot of great artwork that's done quickly. There's a lot of bad artwork that's taken a really long time to develop. That said, I've probably spent 250 hours on a project. So it just ranges depending upon what the material is. Do I like sculpting with wood or clay better? Yeah, that's a great question because I think that the end result is relatively the same thing, and I love each of them equally because of the process and the difficulties that either material presents. So with wood, you're starting from an object and carving, or you're starting from like a block and then carving down. You can't retroactively add things on once you've made that decision. So you have to convince yourself that you can't make a mistake. You're going to make mistakes, but it's this ability for you to see through a mistake and just keep on moving forward. Like every decision that you make can ultimately be balanced by your next decision. And then on the other spectrum, with clay, you have an infinite amount of time almost, as long as you keep the clay malleable and moist, because it's basically mud. So if you keep it moist, you can work on this sculpture for an indefinite amount of time. So when do you call it finished? I think that there's a scale for figurative artists between impression, like giving the impression of a human, and then realistically displaying a human. But the real thing is, like, you'll never be able to imitate a human perfectly. It'll always be seen as a sculpture that looks like a human and not a human. And so I find this spectrum of completion really interesting, of like being able to allow people to know that it's a human, but maybe not for its realistic qualities. And that's where these natural events that happen, like a split in the wood, that's when those are actually being introduced to this process. What type of technology do I use to produce my work? I'm pretty basic. I use a lot of traditional tools, anything from like a chainsaw to a mallet and a chisel. My sculpting tools for clay are mostly my hands, and then I use random kitchen utensils like spoons and whatnot, but really pretty basic, not very much. Although I did study animation in college, and so I know a lot of digital techniques as well. For example, I know how to sculpt in a digital program called ZBrush. And then also that introduced me to a technique called photogrammetry, which allows you to take a lot of photographs of an object, and that creates a 3D point cloud, so you can put that into like virtual reality or augmented reality, which is great for right now because people can actually see what my sculptures look like in their house. If you want to check that out, I've got a couple of examples on my website, so you can actually see my sculptures in your house if you want. How do I price my work? Pricing artwork is really simple. It's like any other business. I give myself an hourly wage. I cover my material costs. I'm a sculptor, so I have to buy clay, I have to buy metal armatures, I have to buy molding, casting materials. If I'm working with wood, I have to buy the wood. I do that. Commission is also another element. Typically, if you're working with a gallery museum, they take a 30 to 50% commission, which is great because what that's basically paying them for is to engage with the community, promote your work, and introduce you to their collectors, which is great. It's a great relationship. Also, with that, I have to pay for my taxes, obviously, depending upon how much I'm making per year. And then, since I'm predominantly selling online, like through PayPal, I have to worry about fees. So PayPal, every transaction you make, there's a 3% fee. So that also is introduced to my payment. What do you do when there's no money coming in from your artwork? Honestly, there's this whole thing about artists being starving, or the starving artist. I don't really think that's true. I think that ultimately, if there is no money coming in, you're not reaching the public that you want to with your artwork, so you need to change what you're doing. I think that artists are malleable in their way to reach people and to communicate their message. And then also there are different things like grants, artist residencies. There's just a lot of options because people love art and people want to see it. And so those are all the questions. I really hope that was helpful. I tried to keep it quick and short, but if you have any more questions, please let me know. And look out for the Vernon Filley doing a few more of these. I think throughout this time of the pandemic, they'll be introducing new artists, and those artists would love to talk to you and engage with your curiosity. So I hope you stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.